And I kind of enjoy a lot of like 80s action movies. Like Predator is unironically one of my favorite movies, not because I think it's high art, but just because, I think it's enjoyable and decently made. It's a well put together example of what it is, which is an action movie that's basically just an excuse to have, interesting looking scenes with actually a significant amount of suspense in them, which is something that I think a lot of modern movies with action in them just completely fail to get right. Is that they have action scenes, technically speaking, that don't involve any level of suspense or stakes really. But that's not the case for some of the older movies that I enjoy. Actually, when I watched Predator for the first time, I actually did feel afraid for Arnold Schwarzenegger, which that sounds silly, obviously, but that I actually enjoyed watching the movie where I could feel afraid for the protagonist. And RoboCop, RoboCop is actually higher than that. I was expecting it. I watched Cyborg before I watched RoboCop, which Cyborg has one of the best intros that you could ever hope to see in a movie. It's actually like, if the film had been as good as the intro, it would have been just like a masterpiece of cinema, which it wasn't. But it was serviceable. It was an okay movie. I enjoyed it. It's not the kind of movie I'd like rewatch multiple times to try to understand the layers of meaning, because there aren't any. But it was a decent, serviceable film for what it was. But RoboCop really surprised me because RoboCop actually works as a cyberpunk drama. It's a fairly well done cyberpunk drama, and something I really enjoy about it is I feel like RoboCop really just it has the elements necessary, but it doesn't carry them too far. For instance, there's in the remake of the RoboCop movie, I haven't watched it, but I have got this much from seeing the trailers. There's apparently a significant amount of emphasis on his interactions with his family and things of that nature. I recall Red Letter Media saying something to the effect that, it felt stereotypical how these very current year, all of the family interactions and family drama and all of that. In the original RoboCop movie by Paul Verhoeven, you definitely get the sense that family is very important to RoboCop, but they don't actually feature very prominently in the film. They basically are there enough to give you emotional stakes, to make you feel for this Murphy character who is trapped within the machine, to make you care about Murphy rediscovering himself as a human being as opposed to just the machine which he is, or which he has been made into. The scene in which the Murphy character returns to his house, I'm not really spoiling the story there. You could probably guess that something of that nature occurs, but the scene in which Murphy returns to his house and remembers what happened there, that was very well done. I actually felt myself choking up a little bit. Like, this did not draw out the very strong emotional response, by which I mean bawling like a baby, that I got when I saw Arrival or Joker or, some of these more emotional films. But I actually did feel myself choking up a bit when I was watching the scene in which Murphy returns to his by now abandoned and for sale house and remembers what transpired there. That was not something I expected, honestly. I did not expect an 80s action movie to make me feel things like that. But it did. And that's good. And I really wish I could feel that more often. I wish I could feel that when I watch recently made films, which unfortunately usually I don't. Dull sadness is usually the best I can get from films that have come out recently. So, also something about RoboCop that really makes it work is it has a good soundtrack, and that's actually part of why I watched it. I understand it has a good soundtrack. I've seen reviews for the game, which I haven't played or anything. I don't even own it, but in which they talk about how it's good because it features some of the soundtrack from the original movie. And something that most of my favorite movies have in common is a very strong soundtrack. And RoboCop has that. The soundtrack isn't amazing. It's not over the top. It's not like the best movie ever from a soundtrack point of view. Speaking of which, Arrival is one of my favorite movies from the point of view of its soundtrack, and it's also just my favorite movie overall. Speaking of soundtracks, I was actually really disappointed by Mad Max Fury Road, which I watched because I was expecting it to be an amazing, awesome, epic movie with epic visuals and an epic soundtrack, and the commercial for it actually did feature a very strong soundtrack. And if they just put more of the soundtrack from the trailer into the movie, I feel like that movie would have been an incredible experience, because the visuals in Mad Max Fury Road were actually really good, and with practical effects too. I actually cared about what I was seeing on screen in a way that I don't when I watch, for example, like Disney Star Wars, or, whatever disposable CGI trash of the week, or, even worse, Marvel filth. But unfortunately, Mad Max Fury Road had very strong visuals, really over the top, beat you over the head with the message, but, still serviceable writing. It wasn't subtle. It was about as subtle as being whacked in the head by a baseball bat, but at least it worked for the most part. There was one element in it that I thought was a bit dubious, but it was mostly well written. If you're willing to suspend disbelief, like, the obvious absurdity of a society in which water is scarce and rationed out and treated like some kind of rare drug, I'm not saying there isn't a place in the world where water is that scarce. I'm just saying people literally couldn't live there. You will never have a society in which water is treated with that degree of reverence, because human beings couldn't survive if water was that short. So you will never have a human society in a place like that, Because maybe some hypothetical civilization of fennec foxes or something, you might have water treated that way, but not human beings. That's also a problem with the book Dune, by the way. It's actually completely stupid how much they reverence water, for the simple reason that if water was that rare, no one would live there. There are plenty of planets where no one lives, and Arrakis, if water was as rare as they make it out, so rare, in fact, that people would be grateful when you spit on their carpet, it just wouldn't be a place with people in it, because no one could survive with that level of water scarcity. But anyhow, enough about the problems with Mad Max Fury Road, of which the main one, in my opinion, is just the soundtrack. I would love to see a fan edit of that film that had a dramatic soundtrack to match the to match the very good visuals that are on the screen. I think you could make it a truly epic movie, which it just barely missed, if you had a soundtrack that was up to the same level as the rest of the movie. But Paul Verhoeven's Robocop, it actually achieves that. And to be completely honest with you, I am not a Paul Verhoeven fan insofar as the limited number of films of his I have seen. I kind of understand what he was doing with Starship Troopers, but I didn't like it. This is something I've talked about with my friends and my family, and I'm happy to say that some of them have the same opinion that I do, which is that a subversive retelling of a not very good story is, at the end of the day, not a very good story. And that's my feelings on Starship Troopers. I didn't enjoy it one bit. I honestly just kind of sat through it, like, I guess, for street cred. But Robocop I really enjoyed. And the action scenes were well done. Something else I enjoyed, which I didn't expect, because I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of these kind of terrible cop dramas, is that Robocop is actually extremely ethical. He doesn't actually kill people who aren't an imminent threat. And especially in this day and age, when the police have started behaving like the samurai class in degenerate Edo, Japan, where they just... I don't know if you're aware of this, but the samurai in Edo, in late stage Edoism, as it were, there was a practice known as crossroads killing, wherein the samurai were so above the law that they would literally just murder people at random in order to try out their new swords. And they're almost never punished for that, by the way. It was completely illegal, but the samurai were generally above the law, and like one of the few cases of a samurai being actually executed for killing ordinary people was when a particularly insane samurai just literally went on a killing spree in a red light district. Like, literally just basically like imagine a mass shooter but with a sword rather than a gun, and just went on a killing rampage in a red light district. And he eventually was executed. But in general, in Edo, Japan, if you were in late Edo, Japan, if you were a samurai and you just murdered ordinary people to try out your sword, you didn't get punished for it. And this is something that you see now with the police union, protecting people who are completely reprehensible. Like, just Google Daniel Shaver, for example. If you want to see a really appalling case of a cop who clearly murdered someone in what, the Japanese would have recognized as a crossroads killing. A cop who clearly just murdered someone because he knew he could get away with it and he wanted to see how it felt. A law-abiding citizen who never committed any crime, was in no way, shape, or form a threat, was literally on the floor, unarmed, begging for his life. And, oh, and by the way, if you're one of the horrible people who will make excuses for that, because you assume the victim is a black guy, no, it was actually a white man that this happened to. Daniel Shaver was white. He was a married father of 2. He was also white, so this wasn't even a racially motivated thing. It was just a psychotic cop who wanted to kill someone and get away with it. And he did, thanks to the police union. In fact, the cop who killed Daniel Shaver literally got a $30,000 a year tax-free pension for the PTSD he suffered as a result of murdering an unarmed man for fun. So that's the kind of culture we have in America, unfortunately. America is a morally bankrupt country, so I guess it makes sense for it to be currently in league with the genocide going on in Gaza. But I did not see that kind of moral bankruptcy in Robocop, at least not from the good guys, which is, I was pleasantly surprised by. Robocop never kills anyone who's not an imminent threat. Robocop deliberately avoids killing people who probably have it coming when they're not clearly an imminent threat. Robocop he's almost, it's almost like Batman in a way. Unlike, he does eventually end up killing some people, but it's very clearly in a self-defense or a defending another innocent life scenario. Not, I was honestly expecting to see Robocop like taking his revenge and putting down people like in kind of a Judge Dredd way, but he doesn't. Because it's not Judge Dredd. It's a far more ethical character and a far more ethical movie. The movie is, it's kind of violent and there's some stuff in it that's, potentially unsuitable for children. But honestly, this is a film that I would not object to children seeing as long as their parents are with them, because it does have a moral foundation. It is not a morally bankrupt film. It is a film with a strong sense of morality, and something that my a friend of mine loves to talk about Fred Rogers as a great role model, and I think he's right. And I don't know if you've ever seen Fred Rogers' acceptance speech for when he received a Lifetime Achievement Award, but one of the things he emphasized then was that if you create media, you have a responsibility to convey the idea that life is precious, that life matters. In other words, to not be nihilistic about human life. And a lot of 80s action movies are kind of leaning pretty heavily into nihilism about human life, at least with regards to most people. But Robocop, for the most part, doesn't do that. Robocop is morally rooted. There is the idea that human life is important. And even the bad guys who end up getting killed, it's not something that is, it's not predicated on the idea that it's okay to kill certain people because, they're just unimportant. It's always very clearly like a self-defense scenario. So I really did like that. And I actually also appreciated the social commentary in Robocop. I was expecting it to be kind of cringe, to be frank. A lot of modern movies do have a sort of, like, beat you over the head with, remember this, current year, let's talk about this thing that is, I'm going to criticize. the social commentary in RoboCop, it's good. It has a lot to say about the about late stage capitalism. Basically, it's very cynical about late stage capitalism, but it doesn't go too far. It doesn't. The film feels kind of witty and cynical, but not preachy. And it also doesn't feel like you just have some director who's just, very far up his own, you know what I mean, because wanting to believe he's smarter and better than other people. You don't get that. It's not like this kind of elitist disdain for culture. It's more along the lines of what you would see in a film like They Live, which, by the way, is a very good movie, highly recommended. It's a critique of culture coming from the heart, I would say. I got the impression when I was watching the social commentary in RoboCop that I was getting Paul Verhoeven's accurate, heartfelt take on late-stage capitalism, which was very much on display in the 80s, and unfortunately has progressed and metastasized since then. Honestly, some things in the film, like there's a scene in which a certain character who's the head of a corporation, or is in a high position in a corporation, says unironically, "We almost are the military," which is unfortunately more true now than it was at any time in the 1980s, because these things have metastasized and become worse over time. So at this point, I'm just going to probably start repeating myself and saying something I already have said before, so I'm going to cut my little vlog here. But anyhow, if you haven't seen the original Paul Verhoeven RoboCop, I strongly recommend seeing it. And if you have kids, it might be okay to watch it with them. If they're boys, they'll probably really like it. I don't know how little girls would react to this movie, but you have small boys and you're a parent and you watch it with them, I think it might be good. Just make sure they understand that they're not supposed to talk like that, because there is some swearing in the movie, and there are some scenes of violence in the movie. Though honestly, unfortunately, in this day and age, if you have boys and they have access to the internet, I don't think there's anything in RoboCop that would actually be shocking. But, good to watch with parents if you do have kids present. But anyhow, that's all, and take care. God bless. Cheers.